The frost on the gun sight made it almost impossible to see. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell pressed his face against the cold metal of his .50 caliber machine gun, his breath forming small clouds in the sub-zero temperature of the B-17's waist gun position. Below them, the Ruhr Valley stretched out like a patchwork quilt of industrial targets and flak batteries. Around him, dozens of flying fortresses droned through the sky in tight formation, each one carrying 10 men and 4 tons of bombs into the heart of Nazi Germany. Mitchell had fired thousands of rounds in training. He'd hit paper targets, towed sleeves, even clay pigeons launched from trucks. He'd graduated top of his gunnery class. But now, 3 missions into his combat tour, he had a secret that kept him awake at night. A secret shared by almost every gunner in the 8th Air Force. He couldn't hit anything. The statistics were damning, though they'd never tell the crews. For every 100 rounds fired at enemy fighters, 96 missed their target. 96%. Young men were dying because their defensive fire was essentially worthless. And nobody knew why. The intercom crackled. Bandits, 10 o'clock high. The pilot's voice was tight with fear. Mitchell swung his gun toward the threat, his hands already shaking from cold and adrenaline. 3 Focke-Wulf 190s were diving out of the sun, their wings sparkling with cannon fire. He pressed the trigger, feeling the familiar hammering recoil against his shoulder. Tracers arced out into space, beautiful and deadly streams of light. They passed harmlessly behind the attacking fighters. He adjusted, leading the target more. Still nothing. The FW-190s screamed past, their 20mm cannons punching holes through the bomber formation. Mitchell watched in horror as the B-17, off their right wing, erupted in flames, men tumbling from the hatches like burning matchsticks. "Why can't I hit them?" he screamed into his oxygen mask, but the roar of engines and gunfire swallowed his voice. Day after day, mission after mission, it was the same nightmare. Gunners would fire until their barrels glowed red, until ammunition cans piled up at their feet, until their shoulders were bruised purple from recoil. And the German fighters kept coming, kept killing, seemingly immune to the storm of lead thrown at them. By late 1943, bomber losses were unsustainable. On some missions, 20% of the aircraft didn't come home. Each one carried 10 fathers, sons, brothers. The 8th Air Force was bleeding to death over Europe, and their defensive guns might as well have been shooting blanks. Then Lieutenant Colonel William Kepner received a phone call from a civilian physicist named Dr. James Thompson. Thompson had been studying something called deflection shooting, the physics of hitting a moving target from a moving platform. What he discovered was both simple and devastating. The human brain, it turned out, was terrible at calculating the necessary lead angle. When a fighter approached at 400 miles per hour and the bomber was flying at 180, the gunner needed to aim almost 30 feet ahead of the target. 30 feet. But instinct, fear, and adrenaline made that impossible. Gunners aimed where the enemy was, not where they would be. Thompson proposed something radical. Aim behind the target. It sounded insane, counterintuitive, like telling a drowning man to breathe water. But the physics was sound. By aiming behind a fighter during its attack run, the natural convergence of their flight paths would bring the target through the stream of bullets. In January 1944, Thompson was given 8 weeks to prove his theory with a test group of gunners, 8 weeks to double their hit rate, or American boys would keep dying at the same horrific pace. Mitchell was one of 50 men selected for the experiment. When Thompson first explained the technique, Mitchell thought the man was crazy. Aim behind the target. Every instinct screamed against it. But Thompson was patient, showing them the math, the trajectories, the ballistic curves. Most importantly, he let them practice. Day after day, they fired at towed targets using the new method. At first, it felt wrong, unnatural, like writing with the opposite hand. But slowly, impossibly, the hit rate began to climb. 2% became 4 became 6, then 8. By March 1944, Mitchell was back over Germany. The mission was Berlin, the most heavily defended city in the Reich. His hands were steadier now, his mind clearer. When the Mi-109s came diving in, he did something that still felt like suicide. He aimed behind the lead fighter, tracking it backward through his sight. He pressed the trigger. The fighter flew directly into his stream of fire. He watched pieces of cowling tear away, saw smoke trail from the engine. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and dove away, trailing fire. Got him? Mitchell's voice cracked over the intercom. I got him, but it wasn't about the kill. It was about the fact that his bullets had finally, gone where they needed to go. He wasn't firing blind anymore. None of them were. Within 8 weeks of implementing deflection shooting across the 8th Air Force, the kill rate doubled, then tripled. German fighter pilots, who had grown accustomed to pressing their attacks with relative impunity, suddenly found themselves flying into walls of accurate fire. Losses mounted. Attack tactics had to change. The hunters had become the hunted. By summer of 1944, Allied air superiority over Europe was complete. The invasion of Normandy succeeded, in part because American bombers and fighters controlled the skies. And they controlled the skies because men like Mitchell had learned to aim at empty air and trust the physics. Mitchell survived the war. He flew 35 missions and returned home to Nebraska in late 1945. He never spoke much about the war, but sometimes on cold winter nights, he'd stand outside and look up at the stars. He'd think about all those young men who died in the frozen sky because their bullets curved the wrong way. He'd think about 8 weeks that changed everything, and he'd remember the simple, terrible truth that wars are won not just by courage, but by understanding the unforgiving mathematics of death.